Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Start my timer. Thank you for coming for the last session of the day. We're going to talk about the current state of SBOMs for end users. My name is Zaneski. I'm a staff software engineer at a company called the Fed Unicorns. I live in Denver, Colorado. I'm a maintainer for the Kubernetes, Protobom, bomctl projects, and some other open sourcey things. But we'll be talking about bomctl and Protobom in a little bit. Want to give a very quick disclaimer. I am not an SBOM expert. I'm just a dude trying to get things done here. These are hard problems to solve, and I have lots of opinions and hot takes. But I do show up, and I did put my money where my mouth is to get kind of frustrated with how things were, and then go on to become a maintainer and work on some of this tooling. So that's where this is coming from, a place of kind of reflecting and trying to see how we can improve and get better. Austin asked a great question, what is an SBOM? CISA defines an SBOM as a list of ingredients that make up software components. This is, your document. We don't have to get too much into specifics. I assume most people know what an SBOM is here, but this idea that we are producing these software artifacts and the people consuming them really want to know and need to know the ingredients and different bits and pieces that went into that. So the dependencies that were used, and we'll see there's other different types of SBOMs, but really this idea that just like when you buy your car, they have that bill of materials, or you buy that spinach at the grocery store, they can trace that spinach back when it gets E. coli to the water source in the greenhouse that it grew in, which is really cool. Quick life cycle, talking about SBOMs. There's all these different phases that we really talk about. The generate step is where most of us are that are producing them, and then the consuming step is where most of the end users and other people are that are taking these and using these. A lot of these steps in the middle here are kind of higher level of maturity, but it's the idea that the data we might be generating still needs to be cleaned up a bit, and some other manual and other steps out there. So. CISA defines SBOMs as having a bunch of different types. I'm not going to make you read these. The two we actually care about and two that most people are going to work with are these build SBOMs and these runtime SBOMs. And there is a reason that we need to have both of these. Specifically when we're talking about things like dependencies is a great example. So your build time SBOM might dynamically link to a library that is being built and provided by the runtime. So there's really no way that you can kind of represent that as you're going in if it's a dynamically linked library. So we do need to have this concept of there are these different environments, there are these different receipts that we do need to put together the whole picture to understand what went into our artifact and what we're running in production. So, but feel free to check out this PDF. They got some great stuff in there. Obvious question is, why should you actually care about any of this? Because regulations, always the #1 top priority. We have the executive order that I'm sure you've heard mentioned several times at this point, but this is the idea that we need to secure our nation's supply chain. FedRAMP requirements, anyone that's selling software to the US government is going to be required, and I think currently is required to provide a software bill of materials. The FedRAMP requirements are actually changing or changed very soon, so be on the lookout for that. For our EU friends, there's the EU CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act, which also mandated SBOMs. So other countries are adopting this kind of idea that we do need to provide these sorts of receipts. And then obviously for security, when we have our open source projects or we have our software artifacts that we're putting into production or high security environments or even just like your work's business proprietary stuff. Security is super important, if not the most important thing. So we need to be able to quickly look up what versions we're running, what went in here when there's a new vulnerability that drops. We want to know if we're quickly affected or not. SBOMs make that real easy for us to do. And they let you do cool things. And these cool things are, this idea that if we have all of our SBOMs and all of our dependencies, maybe on a time series database or a timeline, it's really easy for us to go back and look to find out what workloads were vulnerable when, right? We can cut down our audit time or our mean time to resolution if we know that, hey, I was running this version had a CVE, let me go check the audit logs for this server. And there's a lot of other cool stuff we can do over time, but they are important. I want to talk quickly about how I came to give a crap about SBOMs and why they mattered for me. In 2022, I was working at a company called ChainGuard. I had a ChainGuard image which had a very fancy SBOM attached to it. Kind of had a bunch of information about the base container image that we were using. I took my code, my app, this is the part that I actually care about. I built my app, which was Go, into a binary, and I was able to produce an SBOM for the dependencies and what went into that build. So now I have this base container image, which has an SBOM, and I have my application, which has its own SBOM. So I take my application, I put it on top of that base container image. How do I represent what I just did as an SBOM? Do I take the two, smush them together? Do I generate a new one with my binary in it? I had no idea. And all the people I went and talked to kind of gave me this like, well, I don't actually know how to do that. So I went to one of the very smart people that I talk to pretty often. You may have heard of our good friend Adolfo Garcia or Puerco. And I asked Puerco, how do I do the thing? And he said, the community is still figuring that out, right? So this is back in 2022. He's like, you can either combine them or produce a new one. Cool, those are the two options I thought I should do. Which one should I do and how should I do it? Yes. Right? So not necessarily much guidance, but like, again, to me this was very new. The fact that things were being thought on and worked out, it was like, cool, like, I guess I'll just do something for now and we'll make it happen. So where are things now? Well, quick sidetrack about Zarf. If you're not familiar, you may have heard Zarf. We donated it to the OpenSSF. It is a tool that is designed to get software into an air gap environment, so it can, you can list all the things you want to bring with you to then burn on a CD and walk into a secure environment. The DoD calls that sneaker net. And so I was working with some Zarf stuff. I had to produce a vulnerability report for a given Zarf package. A Zarf package could have 10 containers bundled in from all across the internet in different registries. When we build a Zarf package, we produce a SBOM for each of those containers that we put into it. So now I have a OCI artifact, or basically a big tarball, with 10 SBOMs built into it. I went to go scan that with a pretty well-known vulnerability tool like Trivy or Gripe, and the tools obviously blew up because they have no idea what a Zarf package is. Cool, that's okay. So I decided, okay, I either need to scan all 10 of these SBOMs and aggregate the results, or I need to then combine all the SBOMs and then do one scan. And that's super fun. And so here I am 2 years later, and this problem is still really familiar sounding. So I did what most nerds did back in April 2024, is I went on Twitter and I asked the same question, this time with a little tongue-in-cheek trolling to know what the answer was going to be. If you believe Twitter metrics, the fact that this tweet had 2,300 views was kind of wild too. And so, of course, my friend Puerco responds, knowing what I was trying to do I want one SBOM or two? Both are valid options at this point. And then I actually don't know Wes here, and this isn't to throw any shade at Wes. I appreciate them engaging and providing an option here. So Wes suggests I take the union of my 2 different SBOMs. And I respond with, what tooling do you recommend to do this? Looking to not lose fidelity, right? Because I have 2 very high-quality SBOMs. And Wes responds with, I'm not familiar with the SBOM tools that are available. Maybe someone else on this thread can answer. And again, I thank Wes for trying to step in and answer my question, but I think this is the perfect summary of my impressions of the SBOM community right now. It's just like, the tools are out there. I was at SBOM-orama a couple weeks ago, and I asked a very similar question to the room of SBOM experts, and I said, we need to build these tools, and someone responded afterwards, said, oh, the tools exist, you just have to go find them. It's like, cool. Real quick talk about why this is important, why this matters. In 2019, the DoD put out this DevSecOps reference implementation. This basically says that to build secure software inside of the US DoD, we should be using things like Kubernetes and containers to deploy into environments. Again, the fact that I still can't do what to me is the very basic thing of producing an SBOM with a container image, and there's no guidance on how to do it, is still kind of mind-blowing and crazy, but this actually matters, especially when this is the recommended approach to deploying software. So talking about the current state, we can't avoid talking about formats. There are 3 notable formats that we talk about with SBOMs. CycloneDX, which is done by the OWASP folks, SPDX, which is Linux Foundation folks. There is a DoD effort that we don't really use or talk about anymore called software identification tagging. And then there's also SIFT has their own version of SBOM. We'll talk about SIFT in a little bit, but we try not to talk about or use the SIFT format. It's more of like an interchange format. But you can't avoid talking about these formats. And one of my big complaints with this is most of the focus around these formats and talking about SBOMs is we're so focused on spec completeness at this point. Like, we're focused on getting and dialing the spec perfectly. And I think that we're almost stuck in like the academia world where we're talking about features we might need one day, and we are really like digging into the whole reference design implementation. We're not really focused on end users and solving their problems. We're not really focused on practical use cases and examples of how to do these things. And we're definitely not really focused on interoperability at this point. The two formats, while we can convert and change between them, I think they're on better parity now, but it's definitely been frustrating to go from one or have tooling that produces one or the other. Current regulations, mostly checkbox-driven development at this point. The requirements for FedRAMP and the executive order say you have to supply an SBOM. Doesn't say anything about how high quality or up to date. Accurate, complete, thank you, Camden. So it's really just a checkbox, and this isn't really the fault of the people receiving this, right? You have some like 18-year-old airman from, that is responsible for saying, yes, this vendor that I'm buying software for has provided me an SBOM. They don't know what to do with opening this up, looking for it, validating it. They're responsible for checking a box, and that is what they do, is they check the box. The reality means that you can pretty much submit an empty SBOM.json file or a handcrafted Microsoft Word doc, and it will still check that box. And that's not good at all. Again, FedRAMP has some new changes coming. I think they're trying to address this, but we'll see. Talking about tooling, it's still mostly find your own. There are lists out there of tooling. Fun story from that SBOM-orama. Someone was talking about how they have a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet that if you email them, they'll send you a copy of it that has a list of SBOM tooling. So really glad that the lists are put together and we're getting aggregation, but when I go to Google and I search for SBOM Ruby or SBOM anything, the only thing that I find on the first almost 2 pages of Google are some tooling from the CycloneDX community and folks, and a lot of these tools are still out of date and don't actually support the latest version of CycloneDX. And I just want to kind of show an example of this. Java and Maven is one of the better ones. So we'll open this in incognito real quick. My mouse would work. And so Sneak has some great articles out here. The CycloneDX Maven plugin's great. But again, most of this is just for, Spring's great because they have some actual inbuilt support for producing SBOMs, which is awesome. But God forbid you want to go produce an SBOM for an Android app. There is absolutely no thought or process other than like try to get the Maven or Gradle plugins to work. Ruby is another great example of what this looks like. Oop, that's not incognito. Right, again, Sneak's got some great articles out there. Oh, that's JavaScript. Right, but you got the idea. Again, this one is CycloneDX, and again, I'm not throwing shade or taking shots at the maintainers, but the last commit to this project was over a year ago, and 1.6 of CycloneDX came out in June of this year. So does not support the new version of CycloneDX. And then back to the slide. So we'll skip over the other examples. You get the idea. Python is actually one of the better ones. The Python, the PyPI, the Python packaging in the something team is doing a great job when it comes to tooling. And they've actually got like inbuilt support for doing attestations and creating SBOMs for Python projects. So Python's going a long way. I mentioned SIF. This is kind of like the baseline, what most people are actually using to produce SBOMs. SIF doesn't really do that like build time SBOM. Like you can point at like your source code or your artifact and it can like walk back. Go binaries, this is really easy with. Every Go binary has a list of all the dependencies that went into that binary in the header, which is awesome. So you can take a Go binary and actually produce an SBOM from it. But again, none of this is like built into the actual tooling that I want, which is I want to run Go build and get an SBOM out. And then we can't not talk about Protobom and bomctl. So these are efforts. These are both OpenSSF projects. Protobom is this idea that we can represent what a SBOM is as a protocol buffer, which is binary representation. And at the end of the day, this is pretty much just the API for what a graph would look like, right? This is what I want out of my data. Is I want a graph of data that I can run queries against, I can walk a tree, and I can make decisions based on. So I think Protobom is definitely not trying to be a format at all here. You can basically marshal from Protobom from one to the other, all the different specs and formats. But the idea behind Protobom is we want to be the kind of like standard library for working with this type of data and tooling. bomctl is another great project. There's some great folks from Lockheed Martin that are kind of driving the efforts on this. This is the idea that if we take Protobom, turn that into a CLI tool that you can then have storage behind and do querying. Really practical, definitely trying to solve actual use cases. Big fan of these folks. We have to talk real quickly about build time versus runtime SBOMs, and the Scribe security team has done a pretty good job with this definition. So you can generate a bill of materials using the source code during build time, during runtime, or while doing forensics on the software. Of all these, experts recommend generating SBOM during the build time. That's because build time SBOM generators are more accurate and generate a more complete list of dependencies, right? And this is the idea, again, like I want my Maven or my Gradle or Bazel or whatever I'm using to be able to just poop out an SBOM that is complete because it knows all the things that went into my project to build it. Other question about like what do I do once I have this SBOM? This is a big one that we've been talking about in the community for a while. I guess the TLDR is like stick it in your SBOM folder on your laptop or your desktop. There is tooling out there. A lot of it's proprietary, and I think they're very closely guarding what they're building from each other. So there's not a lot of like public demos or other things you can sign up for. So every time you go check out one of these, there's just a book a demo button that you can hopefully solves your problem. Guac is doing a great job of like being a place that can consume SBOMs and then run queries against. So shout out to the Guac folks, another OpenSSF project. And again, bomctl and Protobom storage are trying to tackle some of this where we don't want to necessarily be the long-term storage for SBOMs, but storing things in a database, local database, remote database, and being able to run some queries against it. And the idea that like I have these very like high fidelity things that have all of my dependencies. I need somewhere that can like keep track of them, watch them, maybe send me alerts as like new versions come out or this vulnerability's popped. A lot of what like Dependabot is doing on my GitHub by reading my Go modules file, right? But not necessarily all the applications that are open source, especially ones that I'm consuming from vendors. When it comes to best practices, it's kind of a shruggy emoji still. SysI's trying to do a great job of getting some stuff out there. The different specs are putting out some stuff out there, but it's really, we're still figuring this out like we were back in 2022. What I really want is guidance. I want guidance to the point that like I don't have to scramble to try to find tooling on Google and look for stuff, right? I need these things to be built into my build tool. So if I could describe what the future of SBOMs look like, this is kind of what I would want to go. So I want to know what the best practices are, right? How do I tie together these different SBOMs and layers? How do I tie together my build time SBOM to my runtime SBOM, specifically around that like dynamically linked library? I want reference implementations. I want to be able to take a tool that is considered to be the perfect tool to produce an SBOM for a given scenario and be able to either go use that or port it to a different language. I want to work backwards from how, as a user or end user, I need to use and consume these things, or as a person who is producing an SBOM to ship, and I want to work backwards to that to solve the problem, to figure out what tooling gets me there. So if I describe my SBOM future, this is my super spicy hot take. I think we need a format at this point. Like, I'm so sick of talking about formats. No end user, no developer actually cares whether they have a CycloneDX, SPDX, SIFT SBOM. They literally just have to ship a thing that solves a problem. And until we can get to the point where like this is boring, it's not going to be consumable in the place we need. So I think either CISA or someone out there needs to really like pull folks together, figure out what we've learned from the past couple years, and either be more prescriptive about the requirements or what these things look like, but I want to stop talking about formats at this point. These things need to be ubiquitous and boring. I need this to be a graph of data that I can query. I need this to be a graph of data of my entire supply chain. How I combine these things, how I add nodes. At the end of the day, right, when I think about a graph, and this is, again, one of the things Protobom does, is it represents everything as a tree and everything as a graph. So I can have my root node, and I can add subnodes to my graph. And I can build this out to, at the end of the day, produce a SBOM of my entire web, which is why I'm really excited about the Protobom tooling. Again, this needs to be built in and automatic. I need to be able to do -- SBOM out when I'm running Maven build. I need it to not be something I have to think about. My build tool should automatically produce this for me, and I can give it a file name that it figures out. And one of the reasons I think the format thing is really frustrating and tricky is, like, let's say that the Go build team wants to go add SBOMs first class to be part of the Go compiler. Which format are they going to pick? They're not going to pick one, because it's going to piss off one camp or the other camp. And so we need to figure out a way that, like, the Go team, the Maven team, all these open source build tools and other languages out there can finally start implementing features to produce this thing. And again, I mentioned this includes my build tools. I want to focus on practical usage, which I've said several times. And I want to be able to index these things on a timeline, right? I want accurate SBOMs that I can take, throw into a service that is self-hosted or open source, or even if I'm paying for it. And I want it to be over time so that when something happens, I can go look back at that timeline. I think Cisco testified before Congress about Log4Shell, and they said it took them 10 days, which was down significantly from Heartbleed before, but it took them 10 days to, like, figure out what's vulnerable and, like, get patches out and stuff. And I believe that, like, the figuring out what's vulnerable piece is what took them the most amount of time. We need to cut that down to be able to respond quicker. Definitely have to talk about where to get involved. Again, I'm not here just to complain and poke holes. Some working groups that I've been involved with, the OpenSSF has some great ones. SBOM tooling working group, we meet on, I believe, Mondays at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock Mountain Time for me. Check it out. There's some great tooling going in here. This is where bomctl and Protobom live. The security tooling working group is also working on a lot of this stuff. Supply chain integrity is where Guac lives, so if you're interested in Guac or any of that stuff, go check them out. I believe they meet Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Pacific time, which is, like, the most expensive slot. That's when every working group meets. There's the SBOM Everywhere SIG, which is part of the OpenSSF. I think that's Tuesday, every other Tuesday in the afternoon. Protobom community meeting, again, 9 a.m. Pacific time, has their own meeting. And then the specs also have their own meetings. I think CycloneDX meets once a month, and I think SPDX meets every week or every other week. You can quickly Google and find out what their meeting times are. And so with that, we've got a bunch of times for questions and tomatoes to be thrown, and you to tell me my ideas and opinions are stupid, and I am very happy to answer and find out I'm wrong. So, yes? Yes.
How close do you think we are to actually getting something more formalized or finalized and away from just, well, hey, find something, pick something, you know, all these working group meetings? Like, are we getting close to the end?
Yeah, great question. Repeating the question for the recording, the question was, how close are we to kind of this being practical and to being closer to my dream world? And I think we've made a lot of great progress in the past year, that's for sure. The tooling is getting there. The SBOM, this one, the SBOM Everywhere SIG, I believe, or the SBOM tooling working group, have been working on reference implementations. They started with, they picked a couple open source projects. Keycloak was the big one, and they said, let's produce a perfect SBOM for what we think Keycloak could be shipping. So folks this is a hard problem, right? Like, I'm not trying to underwrite how hard this is. I'm not sure if we'll ever have a perfect solution. But folks are trying. I think, again, I still think that we need to focus more on, like, working backwards from, like, solving problems and use cases of, like, I need my build tool to be able to do this for me. Like, that is the only way I consider myself to be the average developer who couldn't pass a Google whiteboarding interview, right? Like, the only way the average developer is going to be able to, like, care or do any of this is if it's just automatic and they don't have to think about it. And that is with a -- SBOM out command on their build tool. So I don't know if I answered your question, but any others? Yes? Yeah, great question. Right. What is the lossiness between converting between cyclodx and spdx at this point. I'm going to turn to the person I turn to for all my hard questions about SBOMs, which is Puerco. What's the current state of the world, my friend?
So in Protobom, we have strategies to try to avoid multiple layers or like data loss. It's important to know that Protobom only cares about the dependency manifest side of the SBOM. So anything dealing with vulnerability management, with vegs, all of those extensions are not in Protobom. Having said that, we have a few situations where data loss can occur. We try to be upfront about them, and we're working to make the tooling configurable. So if you don't want any data loss, the tool will fail when trying to convert, or give you back a report whenever that data loss happens. It's mostly transparent, but there are some corner cases when
Yeah, summary for recording. We're getting there. Protobom tries to tackle this. We have settings and options in Protobom that you can say, hey, I want to not have any loss or things, and Protobom will blow up and yell at you. I think it's a bit better. I know there was a period where SIFT was producing like empty values for a bunch of the stuff that we actually needed or cared about. Timestamps always also make things really fun and interesting, as we all know. But I don't actually have a great answer about converting between the two. So, any other questions? Yes.
So, for a lot of these higher level languages, like JavaScript or Python, the actual code that's going to be executing on your machine is going to be compiled C code, or maybe Rust, but probably C, shared libraries on the system, or libraries that are distributed, as part of a wheel or something.
Right.
I guess it seems like an unsolvable problem in C land right now from a tooling perspective. But do any of these other languages do a decent job of identifying what C libraries are shipping with something?
Yeah, so question is about when C gets involved with system libraries, it really gets hard, like with something like Python that's using C libraries to kind of represent what's actually shipping and being used. I think this is why the build time and the runtime pieces are so important. Your runtime, whatever you produce for your environment or your runtime SBOM should have that. Like SIFT actually does a great job of like walking your file system and figuring out the versions of shared object libraries and other stuff. Depending on like whether you're running in a container or on like a virtual host, right? Like obviously things going into a container is a lot easier because we have receipts of every layer that's going in for OCI artifacts. So you can kind of walk that, get a better idea. Looking at some of the stuff ChainGuard was doing, right? Like ChainGuard produces some high quality SBOMs for the stuff that's going in that has links back to like the build pipeline that produced that artifact, right? Like you're getting into the attestation, which that's a whole nother thing is, attestation being useful and consumable for mainstream folks. But I do think it's important to have both that build time and that runtime receipt. So.
I think it's especially important though, like I want to know when, like food is also carrying around a copy of bar with it because they didn't want to pay the cost of rebuilding it on the local machine or whatever reason. Or maybe it's proprietary and not open source.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I don't have a thought other than it's obviously very easy in containers, much easier in containers. So there's some over here. Nope. Cool. Any other questions? Awesome. Thanks for listening to me complain and ramble. Please get involved to help work on some of this stuff if it's interesting to you. So, cheers.